Decoded.
Welcome back to Book Decoded, decoding a book that I think you'll find really insightful. It's Morgan Housel's The Psychology of Money.
Oh, yeah. I really enjoyed that one.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. It kind of flips the script on how we usually think about wealth. You know, we always hear about you need to be good at math or know all these investing secrets. But Housel argues that it's not really about that.
Yeah, it's more about behavior, right?
Exactly. It's about understanding the psychology behind our financial decisions.
Which honestly makes a lot of sense when you think about it.
Right. Because we all know people who are brilliant, but they make terrible financial decisions. And on the other hand, we've all heard those stories about, the janitor who quietly amassed millions.
Yeah, like Ronald Reed.
Exactly. So Housel kicks things off with this story that really challenges that whole financial success equals high IQ thing. He talks about this tech whiz kid.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one.
He was barely out of his 20s and already a multimillionaire. Like, he literally designed a key component of the Wi-Fi router. So you can't say the guy wasn't smart.
Right, incredibly intelligent.
But here's the thing. Despite all his success, he ends up going broke.
It's a classic case of self-sabotage.
So what happened?
Well, it seems like he had some pretty, let's just say, interesting habits when it came to money. Like, he'd carry around stacks of cash just flaunting his wealth. He even once threw $5,000 at a hotel manager.
$5,000?
Yeah, just because he felt slighted.
Wow, talk about extreme.
Right, it's like he was almost trying to lose his money.
And that's exactly Housel's point. This isn't a story about someone who lacked intelligence. It's about someone who lacked self-awareness and emotional control when it came to money.
His behavior ultimately led to his financial ruin.
So even if you're a genius, if you don't have a handle on your behavior, it won't matter.
It's a powerful lesson for all of us.
And to really drive this point home, Housel contrasts that cautionary tale with the story of Ronald Reed. You know, the janitor who became a multimillionaire?
Yeah, an incredible story of patience and discipline.
Reed lived frugally, invested consistently in blue-chip stocks, and just let the magic of compounding work its wonders over decades.
Simple but effective.
No fancy strategies, no risky bets, just slow and steady growth.
It's a reminder that you don't need to be a financial wizard to build wealth.
Exactly. And then Housel introduces us to Richard Fuscone. Now, this guy was a millionaire. Like, he had serious money.
But he ended up bankrupt, right?
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. It seems like he just couldn't resist the temptation to spend.
It's a cautionary tale about the dangers of over-leveraging and lifestyle inflation.
You get a raise, you buy a bigger house, a nicer car, and before you know it, you're drowning in debt.
It's so easy to fall into that trap.
So we've got these three contrasting stories. The tech genius who self-destructs, the unassuming janitor who builds a fortune, and the millionaire who loses it all. What's the common thread that connects them?
Well, Housel argues that it all comes down to our money scripts.
Money scripts.
Yeah, those deeply ingrained beliefs and attitudes about money that we develop through our experiences and upbringing.
So like our money blueprint.
Exactly. And these scripts often operate on a subconscious level, influencing our financial decisions without us even realizing it.
And to illustrate this point, Housel tells a pretty thought-provoking story. It's about this nephew who defends his aunt's decision to work in a sweatshop. Now, I know that sounds terrible, but hear me out.
Yeah, it's a bit jarring at first.
The nephew had witnessed his aunt's previous struggles. She had been working as a prostitute.
So in his mind, the sweatshop was actually a step up.
Yeah, it offered a degree of stability and safety that she didn't have before.
It's a reminder that we all have different perspectives based on our own experiences.
Exactly. And those experiences shape how we view money and make financial decisions.
And sometimes those decisions might not make sense to someone else, but they make perfect sense within the context of that person's life.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that we shouldn't judge someone's financial choices without understanding their context and personal history.
We all come from different places.
And those different starting points can have a huge impact on our financial journeys. Then Housel shifts his attention to another seemingly irrational behavior. Low-income individuals buying lottery tickets.
Oh yeah, that's a classic example.
These are people who are struggling to make ends meet, yet they're spending a significant portion of their limited income on lottery tickets, with incredibly slim chances of winning.
Logically, it doesn't make much sense.
Right. You'd think they'd be better off using that money for essential needs.
But Housel suggests we need to consider the emotional and psychological factors at play.
Okay, so what's going on there?
Well, for individuals facing limited opportunities and financial hardship, The lottery represents hope.
Hope for a better future.
Exactly. It's a chance to break free from their circumstances.
So even though it's not rational from a purely financial perspective, it makes sense emotionally.
It's a powerful illustration of how our emotional state can influence our financial decisions.
Sometimes leading us to make choices that don't seem logical on the surface.
But make perfect sense when you consider the underlying emotions.
And then Housel takes us on a little historical detour. He explores how societal expectations around retirement have evolved over time.
That's an interesting topic.
Yeah, it's fascinating to consider that before World War II, retirement wasn't even a concept for most Americans.
People just worked until they couldn't anymore.
Exactly. The idea of a leisure-filled retirement funded by savings and pensions just wasn't on most people's radar, so what changed?
Well, it was a confluence of factors, the introduction of Social Security, for example.
Even though it provided modest benefits initially.
Right. It planted the seed for the idea of a financially supported retirement.
And then the growth of private pensions helped solidify the notion of retirement as a distinct phase of life.
Though those weren't as widespread as some people believe.
So the concept of retirement as we know it today is a relatively recent phenomenon.
Shaped by social and economic forces that transform the way we think about work, leisure, and financial security.
It's a reminder that our financial beliefs and behaviors aren't static. They evolve over time, influenced by all sorts of factors.
Cultural norms, government policies, technological advancements, you name it.
It's a constantly changing landscape.
Yeah, it's amazing how those societal shifts really, change the game. And speaking of shifts, Housel challenges another deeply ingrained notion that when it comes to money, being rational is always the best approach.
That's interesting. Because we're constantly told, crunch the numbers, optimize your returns, make rational financial decisions.
Right, exactly. But Housel argues that while those things are important, they shouldn't be the only factors we consider. We also need to factor in our emotions, our values, our individual circumstances.
So it's not just about the numbers.
Exactly. It's about finding a balance between the head and the heart.
I like that.
And to illustrate this point, Housel tells this story about Julius Wagner Jauregg. He was a doctor who won a Nobel Prize.
Okay, so what did he do?
Well, he treated syphilis.
Syphilis.
Yeah, but here's the thing. He did it by intentionally inducing fever in his patients.
Wait, what? That sounds kind of dangerous.
It was. And unfortunately, some of his patients didn't survive the treatment. But Wagner Jauregg had observed that fever sometimes helped the body fight off infections.
So he was kind of like experimenting with this idea.
Exactly. He was trying to find a way to use fever to kill the syphilis bacteria.
Wow. So a calculated risk.
Right, and it paid off. Eventually, he figured out how to use a weakened strain of malaria to trigger a fever, strong enough to kill the syphilis, but then treatable with quinine.
So a seemingly irrational approach led to a positive outcome.
Exactly. And that's what Housel's getting at. Sometimes what appears irrational on the surface can actually lead to better results.
So we need to be open to different approaches.
Right. Even if they don't fit neatly into a spreadsheet.
It's about thinking outside the box.
And Housel gives another example. A study that suggested young savers should use leverage to boost their retirement savings.
Okay, so like borrowing money to invest.
Exactly. And mathematically, it might make sense. But emotionally and psychologically, it's just not realistic for most people.
Yeah, I can see that. The thought of seeing my retirement savings fluctuate wildly because of leverage, even if the potential gains are higher, it would totally stress me out.
Right. It's a classic case of theory versus reality.
The numbers might look good on paper, but we have to consider the human factor.
Our risk tolerance, our emotional well-being, our peace of mind.
It's all connected.
Exactly. And Housel emphasizes the importance of finding a financial approach that aligns with your individual needs and temperament.
So it's not about following some rigid set of rules.
No, it's about finding what works for you.
Even if it deviates from what's considered the most rational strategy.
Exactly. Because ultimately what matters is your overall well-being.
Financial and emotional.
Right.
And then Housel shifts gears a bit. He starts talking about the role of history in shaping our financial decisions.
Yes, the historians as prophets. Fallacy.
Okay.
It's the idea that we can use past data to predict the future.
Which is tempting to do.
Oh, absolutely. But Housel cautions against relying too heavily on historical data.
Because the financial world is constantly changing, right?
Exactly. New technologies emerge, regulations change, investor behavior shifts. And historical data might not capture all of those nuances.
And it definitely can't predict those black swan events.
Right, those unforeseen occurrences that have a massive impact.
Like imagine trying to predict the economic fallout of World War II based on data from the 1920s.
It would be impossible.
Those kinds of events completely reshape the world.
In ways that we can't even imagine beforehand.
So history can provide context and insights, but it's not a crystal ball.
We need to be adaptable, open to new information, and willing to adjust our strategies as needed.
And Housel also points out how structural shifts in the financial world can make past advice obsolete.
Like the introduction of 401ks and Roth IRAs.
What worked for our parents or grandparents might not work for us today.
And what works for us today might not work for our children tomorrow.
It's a constantly evolving game.
And to illustrate this point, Housel talks about Benjamin Graham, the father of value investing.
Yeah.
Graham's investing formulas were groundbreaking in their time, but they're not as universally applicable today.
Because the market has changed so much.
Exactly.
So we need to be careful about blindly following old advice.
We need to think for ourselves and adapt to the current environment.
And then Housel introduces this concept of room for error.
Oh, yes. I love this one.
He tells this funny anecdote about German tanks in World War II.
Being disabled by mice?
Mice?
Yeah, seriously. Mice chewing on the wiring cause malfunctions and breakdowns.
Oh, wow.
Even the most sophisticated machines can be vulnerable to the smallest of creatures.
That's a good reminder that we can't predict everything.
Right. We need to expect the unexpected.
So how does this apply to personal finance?
Well, Housel connects it to the importance of building a margin of safety into our financial plans.
Like having a buffer zone.
Exactly. We can't anticipate every possible contingency, but we can prepare for the unexpected by having a cushion.
Both in terms of savings and investment strategies.
Right. It's about acknowledging that life is unpredictable.
And incorporating that uncertainty into our financial decision-making.
It doesn't mean being overly conservative or risk-averse. It just means being prepared for the unexpected.
So if things go wrong, we're not completely wiped out.
Exactly. We have some wiggle room to adjust and recover.
I like that.
Yeah.
It's about being realistic about the fact that we don't have all the answers.
And building in some flexibility for when life throws us a curveball.
And then Housel talks about this really interesting phenomenon, the allure of pessimism.
Yeah, why is it that doom and gloom always seem to get more attention?
It's like those who predict disaster are seen as more credible, while optimists are dismissed as naive.
It's a fascinating paradox.
Especially when you consider that, objectively speaking, the world has generally improved over time.
Right.
So why are we so drawn to negativity?
Well, Housel offers a few possible explanations. First, he suggests it might be evolutionary. Our ancestors who were more attuned to threats were more likely to survive.
So it's like a built-in survival mechanism.
Exactly. But in today's world, it can lead to an overly pessimistic outlook.
Because not every rustle in the bushes is a saber-toothed tiger.
Right. And Housel also points out that money is a topic that affects everyone. So negative financial news tends to grab our attention more than positive news.
It's like we're wired to focus on the potential for loss.
And there's also the fact that progress often happens slowly and incrementally, while setbacks can be sudden and dramatic.
So it's easier to point to a specific crisis and say, see, I told you so.
Than it is to highlight the gradual improvements that have occurred over time.
It's like the difference between a headline and a footnote.
Exactly.
But Housel reminds us that we shouldn't underestimate human ingenuity.
And our ability to adapt and find solutions to problems.
Like he talks about the fracking revolution,
which dramatically increased oil production.
turning a pessimistic outlook on its head.
It's a great example of how innovation can overcome seemingly insurmountable challenges.
So even though we might face setbacks along the way, we shouldn't let pessimism paralyze us.
We need to maintain a sense of hope and possibility.
And then Housel wraps up this section by emphasizing the importance of defining your own financial game plan.
And not getting caught up in what other people are doing.
Because we're all playing different games.
Exactly. We all have different goals, risk tolerances, time horizons.
What works for one person might not work for another.
Exactly. He uses the dot-com bubble as an example. Short-term traders made a killing during that time, but they were playing a different game than long-term investors.
So their success doesn't mean that everyone should start day trading.
Right. And Housel also talks about the influence of social comparison.
Oh yeah, that's a big one. We're constantly comparing ourselves to others.
Especially when it comes to money.
And it can lead to overspending and dissatisfaction.
Because we're trying to keep up with people who might be playing a completely different financial game.
And who might not even be happy themselves.
Right. So Housel encourages us to define our own financial game by writing a personal mission statement.
Okay, a money mission statement.
Exactly. It should outline your investment philosophy, your time horizon, your risk tolerance.
So it's like a roadmap for your financial journey.
Exactly. It helps you stay focused on your own goals.
And not get sidetracked by what other people are doing.
Right. Because ultimately, it's about finding what works for you.
And building a financial life that aligns with your values and aspirations.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about Housel's ideas. But I'm curious about how he actually applies these principles in his own life.
You know what I find really refreshing is he's not chasing ever-increasing wealth for the sake of it. He's more focused on contentment and financial independence.
There's a good point. Like, he's not on that hedonic treadmill we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Always wanting more and more.
Right. He seems to understand that true wealth isn't just about money. It's about having the freedom and flexibility to live a life that aligns with your values.
Yeah, like being able to spend time with your family, pursue your passions, travel the world.
Exactly. And he even made a decision that some people might consider financially irrational. He paid off his mortgage early.
Oh, really? Because we're always told that it's better to invest your money for higher returns rather than paying down debt, especially low-interest debt like a mortgage.
Right. But for Housel, the psychological benefits of being completely debt-free outweigh the potential financial gains of leveraging his assets.
I can see that feeling of owning your home outright. It must be incredibly freeing.
Like a huge weight lifted off your shoulders.
It's about prioritizing peace of mind.
Exactly. It's another example of how Housel puts his own philosophy into practice.
So what about his investing approach? Does he follow any specific strategies?
He's a big believer in long-term passive investing.
Like index funds and things like that.
Exactly. He invests in low-cost index funds and lets compounding do its thing.
Simple but effective.
No need to try to time the market or pick individual stocks.
Just stay consistent and let time work its magic.
Yeah. And that really ties back to the core message of the book.
That financial success is more about behavior than intelligence.
It's about controlling your emotions, thinking long-term, and making consistent progress.
It's about developing a healthy relationship with money.
One that aligns with your values and goals.
So as we wrap up this episode, what's one small step our listeners can take today to bring their financial behavior into better alignment with their values and long-term vision?
I think it starts with awareness. Take some time to reflect on your own money scripts, those beliefs and attitudes about money that we talked about earlier.
And then think about whether those scripts are serving you well.
If not, maybe it's time to rewrite them.
It's about taking control of your financial narrative.
And making choices that lead to both financial well-being and emotional peace of mind.
That's a great takeaway. Remember, financial success is a journey, not a destination.
And it's a journey that's best navigated with a clear understanding of yourself.
And a commitment to making choices that support your overall well-being.
So that wraps up our deep dive into the psychology of money.
A fascinating and insightful book. We encourage you to check it out for yourself.
And as always, thanks for joining us on Book Decoded.
We'll see you next time for another thought-provoking exploration of a life-changing book.